Now, the countries of China and Russia have long been known for their infamy in terms of politics and economics. In terms of politics, they've been cruel, they've been oppressive of their people, they've been oppressive of society and all rights that are guaranteed due to their citizens. Economically, they've been known for their corruption, they've been known for taking bribes in terms of bribery, embezzlement, and all these sorts of economic mistrust and disparity and whatnot. Now, these two countries, what do they have in common besides that? Well, these countries are also right next to each other, but that actually brings me to my topic today of is cooperation between China and Russia good for the world, considering that these two countries are countries that have been basically infamous for their treatment towards people and infamous for their activity in terms of economics. However, my answer to this question is yes, because first of all, by having cooperation between China and Russia economically, that would actually lead to less of involvement in China, less of an involvement of China in Africa and in the African economy. My second area of analysis is that it would actually lead to a better international relationship of China and Russia in terms of the entire world. And my third area of analysis is that it would allow for the world economy to prosper more so than China's economy is doing so right now. Now, moving on to my first area of analysis, which is that China would have less of an involvement in the African economy. Now, allow me to expand on this. Now, in an Economist article dated August 13th, 2011, the Queensway Syndicate is a syndicate that is based in China and has been active in countries in Africa such as Zambia, Gambia, and Congo for approximately the last decade. Now, this syndicate has been pretty much doing activities that are normal for Chinese corporations in Africa. For example, paying their workers less than minimum wage as set by standards in the UN, abusing human rights, becoming as notorious as the governments themselves in the country, just simple activities that even the government's known for in those countries. Now, by having cooperation between China and Russia, we can cut down on Chinese activity in Africa, which means that corporations in Africa from China would have less of a reason to be in those countries. Because trade between Africa and China is mainly based around raw materials. China imports raw materials from Africa into their own country, in which they manufacture goods in which they sell abroad. However, if the raw materials actually come from a different place, if they come from a separate location, for example from Russia, then China has less of a reason to be in Africa. And because of that, then China will have less of a role in oppressing the people of Africa, and thus that leads to a total net benefit of the region. So that's simply one way of how cooperation between China and Russia is beneficial for the world. Now, in terms of international relations, by having China and Russia cooperate together even economically, that actually leads to a political good. Now, according to an Economist article dated September 10th, 2011, China actually voted against a UN resolution in which to protect citizens in Libya during the Arab Spring Revolution. Now, this is mainly because of China's involvement with Libya and Libya's track record of actually selling oil to China. So because of that, and because of the role of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya as the ruler, that we can see the connection between the former government of Colonel Gaddafi and the government and the corporations of China, in which the government of Libya at that time was supplying China with the oil that it needed, with the raw supplies that it needed. However, because we all know that Russia has a vast oil supply, as shown in, for example, economic reports such as Forbes and other economic reports and whatnot, that we can clearly see that Russia has a vast amount of oil in which it can sell to China. So if we have this cooperation between Russia and China, then there's no need for China to vote against, for example, resolutions that actually protect the greater good, simply because of their economic goals. So by doing so, by appeasing China's economic prosperity, by appeasing their economic goals, that we can increase the amount of good done in the world through international relationships, and because China will stop actually voting against these resolutions, that the world will have a greater impression of China, and China's going to stop voting against these bills because of the relation between Russia and China through their supply. And now moving on to my final area of analysis, which is that it would allow for world economies to further prosper. Because as you can see, as according to an Economist article dated August 13th, 2011, China has had the primary role in basically economies throughout the world, for example in Africa, through countries in Southeast Asia, throughout these areas. However, if China were to just simply draw back its relationship, even just by a tiny little bit, that allows for more breathing room for other corporations. And China can draw back its operations in foreign countries simply by focusing on their domestic economy, focusing on their domestic area, in essence. Because by trading with Russia, it can further gain more material good. And by gaining more material good, in terms of raw material, it can actually produce more manufactured goods, as China is infamous for. So by doing so, by having this cooperation between China and Russia economically, that allows for more corporations to have more breathing room, because these corporations can now move into these other countries that China has been occupying for quite some time. So by doing so, once again, by having cooperation between China and Russia, first of all, that allows for China to further stop operations in Africa, and thus allow for more social rights, allow for more social justice to be done in Africa. Secondly, that it would improve the international relationship between China and the rest of the world. And finally, that it would be economically beneficial to all other economies throughout the world. And that is why cooperation between China and Russia is good. Thank you.